the night watch fly free, across the still of the dawn. And if peace were a mountain, we'd gather around her to bathe in her silence, her power, her call. And if wisdom could sing or whisper his secrets, eternally teaching the ways of the free. In my mind I can see it, I hear it, and I feel it. For love, peace, and wisdom are all part of me. If love has her freedom and peace her expression, surely wisdom will grow like a flower in bloom. The seed has been planted and tended and watered by the prayers of the hopeful and the tears of the brave. We long to return to that place of still waters and sit on the banks under some shady tree. In my mind I can see it, I hear it, and I believe it. And love, peace, and wisdom are all that we need. Some call me a dreamer, some will call me a seeker, one who follows the stars on a quest for the truth. But every believer holds
Hello and welcome from me, Philippa Blackham, to our very special event today, exploring our connection with the divine at this pivotal time. Many thanks indeed to Lucinda Drayton and Marcus Cliff for setting the mood so beautifully there with a special lockdown performance of their song, Love, Peace and Wisdom. Now, it really does feel like we are an international gathering today. We have a guest joining us from the USA, another guest from India. We have people from throughout the Indian subcontinent and Europe, all joining in today's event. In fact, there are translations going on in around 7 different languages, I think. So I hope wherever you are, you feel especially welcome and that you're managing to listen to our program in your own language. And it does feel like we're coming together at a pivotal time in the world. We're just beginning to get a glimpse of life beyond COVID, and yet what the future looks like is in fact very uncertain. And as we begin to contemplate the future, there are going to be so many challenges for us to overcome. And we've all of us had a year of overcoming challenges, each one of us in our own way, dealing with our own situation. And perhaps it's only when we are in times of dire need, that we're in pain or we're suffering, that at that moment our thoughts do turn to God. And as things become increasingly unsettled, it is a question that is beginning to form in the back of many people's minds. Where is God in all this? Now, guiding us on our journey of exploration into the divine, we have 2 people who have very much devoted their lives not only to deepening their own connection with the divine, but also supporting other people to find and deepen their own connection. Reverend Canon Lloyd Casson of the Episcopal Church in the USA is now retired, but he served as the first rector of a parish church in Wilmington, Delaware, which was made up of 2 churches, one with a predominantly white congregation and another with a predominantly Black congregation. And it was Canon Casson's job to unite them and serve both communities. Lloyd, a very warm welcome to you. Thanks so much for being part of today's special event.
Thank you. Good morning.
Absolute pleasure. When you first started out many years ago, how unusual was it to have an African American as the ordained priest in charge?
It was very unusual. I grew up in a parish that was all Black, and this was the American version of the Church of England, the Episcopal Church. And most of the congregations for African Americans and others were separate. As a matter of fact, in the community where I brought these 2 congregations together, there was only that one Black congregation in the entire city. But I'd had the opportunity to serve both of those congregations. And so it was a kind of a destiny thing to come back years later and bring them back together.
An absolutely huge task. And of course, we all know that religion can divide and separate people. And your job was to bring them together and unite them. And we'll be hearing more about that a little later on. But let me also introduce you to our second guest, who likewise is someone who has learned to blend 2 cultures. Brahma Kumari Sister Jayanti is the European director of the Brahma Kumaris. She began her life in India, but was educated and raised in the UK. So she has an understanding of both East and West. And like Lloyd, she has dedicated her life not only to spiritual upliftment of her own self, but also supporting other people to make positive changes in their life by learning the art of Raja Yoga meditation as taught by the Brahma Kumaris. Sister Jayanti, a very warm welcome to you as well. And thanks for joining us.
Hello, Philippa, and hello, Lloyd. Happy to be with you today. I'm talking to you from India, where I arrived just the night before. And it was a long journey from London, but I came suddenly because there was a departure of the chief of our organization, a very, very wonderful person. And my heart told me I had to be here. So I'm now at our headquarters in Rajasthan in Abu.
She was indeed one of our most senior teachers within the Brahma Kumaris organization, and she was particularly known for her ability to connect people with the divine. And of course, in India at the moment, there is also the festival going on of Shivratri, which is about celebrating the incarnation of God, if you like. So it must be a supercharged atmosphere where you are. What is your experience of this time and everything that's going on?
In fact, she passed away on the actual festival day of Shivratri, and people felt it was highly auspicious because she was now 93, and so she'd had a very rich and full life. Of course, we would have wanted her to continue forever, but as you said, she played an incredible role in being an instrument to connect us with the divine. And so the feeling was that it was on this auspicious day that she actually chose to leave her physical form and go further in her journey to be with the divine. So, as you said, it's a very, very charged atmosphere. And we had a lot of people come suddenly. It was a sudden thing, of course, but a lot of people turned up. But it was a very moving and very loving ceremony that took place.
Well, of course, we all of us have mentors, people who go before us and shine a light on a path that we ourselves can follow. And we're going to just have a few moments of quiet reflection now to just bring our energies together from whichever part of the world that we're in. And it would be nice to dedicate this couple of minutes of silent meditation to our senior sister, Dadi Gulzar. And Lloyd, if I could ask you to just lead us in our meditation by sharing with us a few of your own thoughts. That would be lovely.
Yes. First, let's just settle down and get comfortable, but in a posture that promotes wakefulness. And just breathe slowly in and out. And let us, from all of our many places, wherever we are today, let us be here. Not where we were a few minutes ago, or where we would be going when this event has ended, but just here in the present moment, the only time there is. Just letting everything go. Roles, responsibilities, worries, plans, things done and left undone. See them depart and recognize that you are still here. Right here, right now. With every breath, the present unfolding, breath by breath. And here in our own way, in the presence of God, the divine, the supreme, our rock, feel yourself upheld by divine power, divine love. And experience the compassion that emerges from your own soul. And in the stillness, let us give thanks to God for Daddy Gulzar as she makes her journey home. The instrument through which, by whom, so many people have had a direct encounter with God.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. That was a beautiful way to begin our time together. Really special. Sister Jayanti, many people looking at you would just imagine that you have always led a spiritual life. And of course, you are now a mentor, spiritual mentor to thousands of people all around the world. But, you know, your life didn't necessarily always begin that way. In fact, as a teenager, you, in a sense, put your faith in science and you signed up to study medicine, and then you had a change of heart. But do you remember as a child, before any religious ideology or beliefs had infiltrated your mind, do you remember if you had a sense of God or the divine, and if so, what that was?
As a child, I used to accompany my grandmother to all the temples that she used to go to. She was a great temple lover. And so most afternoons or evenings, I would be trotting along by her side, holding her hand to go along to these different places that she went to. And it always gave me a sense of comfort and a sense of safety. But I was very fortunate that by the time I was 7, she and my mother started to meditate in the system of Raj Yoga with the Brahma Kumaris. And so I was introduced very early on to this concept of God as light. But that feeling that I was in a safe place in a temple, and then this feeling of being in the presence of the divine light was a very beautiful one. So that stayed with me.
The idea of God being light. And what about for you, Lloyd? When did you first start having
My
thoughts
earliest
about God?
thoughts that I can recall, I remember an old man with a beard sitting on a cloud, sort of like Merlin or some creature like this, sort of overlooking the universe. But that didn't last long. I remember after that, I began myself to have what I can only describe as intuitions about God and God's presence. And it was visceral. It wasn't just intellectual. It was actually visceral. And especially when it was time to pray. It was almost like walking into some space or being in a presence that I can't describe. I couldn't describe it, but I knew what it was. I knew who it was. And as a matter of fact, in some ways, that's still with me. But those are my earliest memories that I can recall.
I think that's true for many of us, that we have a sort of body felt sense of a presence of divinity, and then we get ideas that come into our head and we start thinking and analyzing. But if we stay in our heart, there is often a sense of something other beyond us that we can tap into. And of course, before we answer the question, where is God in all this, we have to reflect on what we understand, first of all, by this word God. And of course, God means different things to different people, according to which culture and country that you were raised in and the influences that you've had in your life. And throughout our program today, we're going to be hearing the view of people from different backgrounds and ages about the way that they see the divine. And we began by asking them, what does God mean to you?
So yeah, God is definitely, do you say someone or something, however you want to say it, I guess, that, you know, is very like close to my heart, because I genuinely feel like I've had proper experiences with this being or this power, whatever, where I've reached out at times, or just sometimes in quiet moments when I've just been sitting and stuff like that. And I have genuinely felt the connection to that power. So yeah, I think it's hard to put into words what exactly God means to you. It's more of just like a feeling, a connection. It's very subtle.
Probably quite regularly I would kind of ask for help or call in for that sort of divine help. I often actually would probably ask my angels rather than any sort of God or other spiritual thing in that sense. But yeah, I often in times of need would ask for help. And it's very comforting being able to do that. I find it very comforting to have something there to ask for help from that's not a kind of person, as it were. But often, yeah, for me I would be asking the angels to help.
At the human level, I experience him when people do acts of kindness, selfless giving, tolerance, respect, understanding, compassion, and even the strength and courage that we get to face difficulties in our life. I experience him in all of it, as if he has our back. He's there to hold our hand.
I would say I've never experienced God or a religious moment or a spiritual, like a spiritual experience. I've always wanted to ask people but there's no explanation that could ever really do it. But I've always wanted to say, what is it? So like with Christians, when they're in church and they said, yeah, I heard God's voice. It's like, what does that sound like? Like, what are you actually saying? And often it's kind of metaphorical, but a lot of people would say it's very literal. And I guess I've always been curious, what that means, because I have nothing to base it on in my own experience. And so I have very little understanding of it in that experiential way.
I think when I am using my talents and my gifts to their full capacity, without ego, I experience God. I experience God when I am in a community of people there's harmony with people of different backgrounds and different faiths. I experience God that way.
God means to me that he is always protecting me.
Absolutely gorgeous one there to finish. And of course, there is no right or wrong way to answer the question of what does God mean to you. It's simply what is right for you, what works for you. But Lloyd, we did hear there a number of different opinions, some believing that God is just an energy that can be tapped into, that it can be maybe an angelic presence that you're feeling, and that it's not a sort of a being out there at all, that somehow collectively we all form part of God. How do you answer people who are coming from that place, given your background and what you now understand about God?
I was just so happy to hear the different perspectives just a moment ago in this video, because that, in a sense, God is speaking through all of these different experiences. St. Augustine once said, if you understand God, you don't have him. There is something about speaking about divine mystery that is mysterious, and cannot be completely identified with all the I's dotted and the T's crossed and so on. But I do believe that the search in and of itself, I have this sense that when people are seeking, like the young people who were talking about really wanting and looking for something, that there's a sense in which God is actually reaching out and seeking you. That God calls us, and sometimes our hearts are not open to hear it and to at least right away. Circumstances sometimes get in the way. But I think the search is a wonderful thing.
It is true that we often talk about the search for God, and I do sometimes wonder why does that search have to be quite so challenging? But Sister Jayanti, what would you say to this idea that God is beyond our comprehension because it's beyond time, beyond space, and that we have to accept the mystery of that? And also, in terms of understanding God, is trying to answer the question first of who am I? Is that perhaps a better place to start?
I spoke about my early experiences, age 8 and so on. But later on, studying science and putting my faith in science, I began to question the whole subject of God. And the more I asked questions, the fewer answers I was getting. And so I thought, well, I'm going to set that aside until I'm 60 years old, and then I'm going to come back to it. But as destiny would have it, I had the fortune of being in India for an extended period for a gap year. And that's when I was 18. And then through that first period of a few months there, I suddenly had this urge to study, because until then I was being a tourist and enjoying all the sights and sounds that India has to offer, which are plentiful. But I then decided I needed to educate myself with something. And the most obvious thing at that moment was the Brahma Kumaris. So I went along to Dadi Janki, who was in the hometown where my grandmother lived. And what she shared was quite amazing. She talked about the inner being. She talked about conscience, the awakening of conscience. And I realized that I knew so little about myself. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. My journey towards God began because there was that period between 14 and 18 when fashion and music were more important than anything else. But at that point, it was quite incredible, because as I began to understand this inner being, the soul, and what that means and how that functions, what is my mind? How does my conscience work with my feelings and my emotions? And is there always going to be this tug of war between these things, which could sometimes be at opposite ends of the spectrum? How do I align myself with all of this? How do I find myself? And within about an hour, in that very first lesson, there was so much information given that I thought I have to experiment with this. And walking home, I was experimenting and I felt I was flying. And the next day, when they took up the subject of God, my mind was absolutely ready to accept and understand, because in that period of 24 hours, experimenting with this awareness of not being this physical form, Lloyd gave a very lovely meditation guided commentary in which he was sharing this idea of moving away from your roles and responsibilities and all these things. And that's exactly what I was doing, but it happened quite powerfully without my conscious desire almost. I was reflecting on these ideas and I was able to have very powerful experiences. So when I was brought to the awareness of God as a being of light, the one who is the source of God, of truth, of love, of compassion, of all the positive attributes you can imagine, it felt very comfortable. And then when I experimented with meditating on the divine, there was this beautiful experience of that love and peace. And so I thought, this is a journey worth pursuing. And so I know that people have searched for millennia, but I think there comes a moment of time in destiny when God intervenes in human affairs and reveals himself to us. And so on the one side, we would say we've been searching, but on the other side, again, Lloyd put it very beautifully, maybe God has been searching for me. And at that moment, which is right for me, and it'll be a different moment for each one, a different age in their life's journey. And that's absolutely as it should be, huge variety, infinite variety. But when that touch comes to me, you know, it's like a signal, something knocking here, and you respond to it. The doors open and you have this amazing experience of God's love. So I think that self-awareness can bring us to that point where we create the conditions in which God can reach us. Otherwise, we are so locked into our external form and external things, all the things I'm responsible for or I take on myself. There's no space. And I think you need to create a bit of space in your awareness so that God can come knocking on the door.
You've talked about having these beautiful experiences, and many people do, watching a sunset, listening to a beautiful piece of music. You can feel this expanded consciousness, this sense of connection with all the souls of the world. But how do you know that what you're experiencing is actually God and not just something of your imagination, or even, as one of the speakers said, an angelic presence of some description?
I think when I actually had that experience of myself as a being of light, a soul, and it made me realize that for 18 years of my life, I thought I was this body. And now suddenly I'm introduced to this idea, which is very different, that this body is important and very, very precious, because this is how the soul can express itself. And this is how I get insights into everything I know in terms of the world here. But when I have this experience of that inner being, the being that I truly am, and you think about God also as that being of light, because I'm a soul, God is also a soul, except that there's a huge difference in terms of our qualities, but that's in a way the only difference. And so it was very easy for me to feel that, yes, this is a possibility. It's not a mysterious thing, it's not a magical thing or a mystical thing. It seems very logical that God is also a being of light. And that memorial of light has continued to be remembered through the ages and all the different traditions. And so it seems that I'm on track with this idea of light. And so when I would focus on this light, it wasn't something I was imagining, but I was really, truly feeling that love and that power and peace reach me. And you know, sometimes there's a nice sunset, sometimes there isn't. You can't just press a button and make it happen. But this one, it's a formula. I go inside, I connect with the Supreme, and I'm able to experience all of this in my life. And so I thought, this is something very special. And let me continue on this journey. And I still continue 50 plus years later. It's a journey. And so I can't claim that I know God, but what I can say is that gradually over the years, I've developed a deeper understanding and a sense of being closer to the divine in terms of my relationship.
Well, we're talking about God as a being of light, and for many people, it's not just light. There is an energy, a personality there that can be connected with. And let's check in now with our cross-section of different people and their points of view. And maybe as you're listening to this, you can reflect on your own answer to the question. But our second question was, how do you experience the God of your understanding in your day-to-day life?
God to me means everything. I feel as God is my best friend, best companion, and when I remember him, I get a lot of help from him, and he has helped me throughout my life.
I only remember the light. With all the road disappear, you only feel light, and air fresh. My hair is open here, and air fresh. Wow, this is my best experience.
Similar to what love means to me, everything, in the sense that I never separated myself in a second away from Bhagwan. So he is everything, he's with me, he's my reason to be here, he'll be my reason to go back.
Well, a long time ago when I was in my early 30s, I went up the garden to meditate. My daughters were playing at the other end of the garden, and I sat and just sort of started to meditate, and I absolutely had a vision. It's one of those peak moments that you don't get many in a lifetime. I actually saw the interconnectedness of all life. I saw the energy flowing through everything and through me, and I knew that that was the divine, that it was love, that it was beneficent. And it particularly flowed through a bush which had a wasp buzzing in it. Now, I'd always been scared of wasps, and I'd swatted them because I didn't want them near me. I've not swatted a wasp since that day, because I saw that too is the divine expressing itself in another form. So it's all there. Oneness can't not be. We are one. We're just beginning to realise it.
He means love, kindness, and I think about him when I'm sleeping.
The times that I feel like I'm in the presence of God, or my interpretation of God, is when I'm at my most happiest, or when I'm at my most kind of like authentic self, if that makes sense. So when I'm feeling like not bogged down by work, or kind of having external kind of like pressures, when I'm outside on a walk, when I walk by a river, you know, it might seem like a cliche sort of thing, but in those times I'm just myself and I'm just on my own, and that's when I kind of feel the most surrounded by that light, if that makes sense, because I feel light, because I don't think about other things. I'm just accepting where I am, and it's such a wonderful feeling.
I feel I'm conscious of God, or I think about God fairly often. So when I'm working, when I'm doing other things, but it feels more practical at that point. It's more, this is who I think God is, and therefore these are the things I think I should be doing because of that. But in terms of really connecting with God, and almost where you feel like you're able to have some kind of conversation or connection with him, that's definitely in nature, or maybe listening to some really lovely music where I can just sit and be silent and not have distractions around me.
Again, another set of very beautiful experiences. Sister Jayanti, we were hearing people there referring to God as he. Is that just a limitation of our language? Is God not something that is beyond masculine and feminine? How would you describe that?
I think it's part of this patriarchal society in which we think that everything resides in terms of power and authority with a male figure. And so I think that awareness has sort of come down through the millennia. But in fact, if I come back to the basic concept of the soul, I know that the soul that I am, that's occupying this physical form, which is female, but yet the soul is not masculine or feminine, or you could say the soul is masculine and feminine, in that it has feminine characteristics of compassion and gentleness and kindness. These are the things you normally associate with this feminine traits. And then there's also the masculine characteristics. There's the courage, there's the confidence, there's the ability to be adventurous. All of these are there within one soul, except that society tends to sustain according to the physical gender. And so a girl child is given certain things to play with, certain ideas are put into her head. And similarly with the boy child, there's a very traditional generation that rears children in a very specific mold. But the wonderful thing about today's world is that I think we've moved away from those archetypes. I think we're now more open to the concept of male, female characteristics within one individual. And so in India, the most common praise of God is of the mother and father. And so the mother who has unconditional love and will accept me even if I've ignored her for decades, but also the father who has a huge property to give to me, and I want that inheritance. And the inheritance that I receive from God is the wonderful, wonderful inheritance of happiness, because God, in his role, not just as father, but also as teacher, teaches me to be able to look at life from many different perspectives so that I don't get bogged down in negativity and sorrow, but I'm able to lift myself up out of that with a different awareness, a different perception and consciousness. And so I'm able to move into another different realm of happiness, and the sorrow gets left behind. And so I see God as mother and father, a being who has all those characteristics. But of course, our language is such that when we talk about God, the most frequent use is the word he rather than the word she. But it's wonderful to think about God, the mother, and to feel that sense of total acceptance and total belonging when you experience that love.
So very much seeing the divine feminine as being part of that experience. And as you say, it's very much our cultural heritage and our language and the limitations of language. But Lloyd, we mentioned the work that you did in bringing two communities together. And for many people, they turn their back on an idea of God because it has been used to start so many wars. It has been the source of so much conflict. And people say to themselves, you know, how can there be a God? Because only bad things come from people who have this passionate belief about God. From the work that you have done of uniting people, what would you say to bring the whole of humanity together in a common understanding of the divine presence, regardless of gender, as Sister Jayanti has mentioned, but also race and also religion? How do we get on the same page as each other?
Well, first of all, I have to say, I certainly agree with Sister Jayanti. I mean, that's precisely what needs to happen. First of all, to recognize that if we really are, quote, created in the image of God, then that's not black or white or male or female, you know, that, or that's all of it, you know, but it's certainly not, you know, one group superior over another and so on. I think really religion has been, as you say correctly, sometimes behind a lot of the conflagration and conflict in the world. But I question, frankly, how much of it is really has to do with God and or other issues that we blame God for, and we give God credit for our ridiculousness, which is one way to put it. So anyway, there's no question that what's going to change this world is precisely the question that you've just asked, is when are we going to see ourselves as one, one humanity, and that means no matter what our condition, no matter what our circumstances, we are one. That's first. And in my view, a church that doesn't demonstrate this is not really being what the church is intended to be. Martin Luther King Jr. used to talk about the beloved community. And that's exactly what he was getting at. His dream of seeing all kinds of children and Protestants and Catholics and everybody together. That's precisely the dream. And whenever we see that emerging in a way that perhaps we can't understand, God is present in it. I really do think that is the case. And so my work at that time was precisely to help a community or two communities who, by the way, are celebrating their 25th anniversary this year, which I think is incredible. Still strong together, a vital community, demonstrating to the world that that's the way it's meant to be, that this is the beloved community.
That's a lovely phrase, the beloved community. And we're reaching a point of consensus here that there is this divine being, this divine presence in the form of light that is universal, that is beyond any religion. But Sister Jayanti, I wonder what you feel about the way we have exhausted the Earth's resources. Humanity is exhausted. We're all in a place of depletion, having been through this whole year. That when we are in that state, we naturally turn to this other resource of the divine. And I wonder why you feel it is important that we have this conversation about God, about the divine, and that we begin to include that resource as a solution for the problems that humanity is facing. Why is that important now?
You know, we now have access to information which is even beyond the limit of libraries. Libraries are a wonderful place that I've enjoyed in the past, but now we have Google or other search engines. And the word that was being searched about the most last year was God. And it was like a natural instinct from human hearts to seek more information about the one who, in a way, at the back of our head, the back of our minds, we know that there is someone, something that's there. But also people were asking more and more questions about meditation and prayer. And so again, it was like an instinct that was a primordial instinct within a human being. I'm not managing life very well. Things are coming at me that are just too much. What can I do to cope? How can I de-stress myself? And they turned to these words. And at that time, it was just words, but I hope that many people have now found a direction in which to go in, so that through their meditation, through their prayer, they're actually able to come to that experience of a feeling and a presence and a relationship with the divine. That is my dearest hope for everyone. And why I think it's so essential at this time to be having this conversation is because, well, anyway, I think the climate is ripe. 5 years ago, to talk about these things might not have been so acceptable, but I think people are now ready. And also, I think it's because this is the moment of transition. We've been through a very dark period, and yes, there might have been moments of light, you know, glimpses of light within the darkness, but they didn't last for all the time. They disappeared again. And so I think now is a time when we're actually making that transition from darkness towards light. And at this moment now, to be able to come to that recognition of the source of love and power and peace and truth and compassion is so important, because I'm bereft of that. I lack all of these things, and I've been depending on so much that is external for my entertainment, for my pleasure, for my stimulation. And for many of us, we were deprived of a lot of those external things. And so in a very natural way, many people started making the journey inwards. And so now on this inner journey, where do I go? What do I do? How do I do it? If there are people who've had experiences and they can share their experiences, then perhaps it might offer not just hope for others, but it might also offer a path to explore. And truly, it's your own personal exploration that's going to take you further. And as you rightly said at the beginning, it's not that there's a right or a wrong, but rather that you begin that exploration of, first of all, going inside and just asking yourself the question, well, who am I? Am I this hand? Well, I'm more than that. What am I? Who am I? And so this inner journey definitely leads one to that state where one can make that connection with the source. And once you're connected to the source, there is abundance. There is limitless peace and love, more than you alone can take, but it's there for the whole wide world. There's enough for everyone. And I think this is also part of that change of heart and change of consciousness, in which we begin to see each one as part of my family. One supreme parent, mother and father, and one family of the whole of humanity. And I think that's going to make such a big difference to the way in which we treat each other, but also the way in which we treat this planet and nature itself. We don't have planet B yet, no matter how much money we've spent on exploring space, but whatever we can do, we have to do here. And so to treat myself with respect and dignity, to hold my head up high, to be able to treat you with dignity, to be able to treat nature, respect this planet with dignity and respect. I think all those things flow from this one central idea of being a soul connected with the divine.
It's a lovely idea that it's our qualities, it's our values that when we live by them make the difference in the world. And Lloyd, you have led a life of prayer and contemplation, but you've also led a life of activism. You grew up in segregated America, and you witnessed the whole evolution of race relations. And I wonder for you where you see this divide between holding the space for the divine and coming into action and taking direct action yourself. And also, if you take action with a sense of the divine as being part of that action, how much difference do you think that makes?
I think it makes all the difference. First of all, I again agreeing with Sister Jayanti. I mean, that's absolutely correct. It's making sure, understanding who I am, and recognizing that everyone else is exactly the same qualities, that we're all souls. We're all the image of God. We're all light. We're all love. We're looking for it, and we look for it everywhere, and not often just right where it is. And stillness enables that to happen. I agree with that. I also feel that when we are in contact and in communion with God, when we experience the light and the love and the compassion of God, and are enveloped by it and become that in ourselves, that's what's necessary. It's not simply to contemplate. I think that is number one. That's the first step. A lot of people who are activists burn out because they don't have this kind of communion with God. They don't have this place to rest, as it were. But on the other hand, I think it is important for us to give expression to God's love through the instrument of our bodies and our minds and so on, to work for peace and justice and wholeness, for the integrity of creation. I think that's exactly what should impel us to do this. So we're not, sometimes I refer to bearing witness to what's going on. And what I mean by that is being able with compassion to bear witness to the pain and sorrow in the world, to literally bear witness to it. But once you've done that, you simply are not overcome by the burden of sorrow. It's to take that love, that light, that peace, that compassion, and begin to do what you can as a transformer. You become transformed, and you are an instrument for the transformation of society itself. So it's both and I really think that's the way it is. Even in families, I mean, that ought to be the way the nuclear family works. That there's a everyone understands, and that there's a communion with God. Yoga, to use your expression, unbroken, eternal, and that it's through that and through those eyes that you look on the world, you look on life, and what action is necessary, you take. Obviously, that's nonviolent, and it's not. In my view, it's not war. There are other ways to bring about change.
Well, we're wandering into the territory of how much direct involvement God has in our lives, and how much are we a part of the being of the divine and connecting with that. So let's move now to our final video, in which we've been asking people about their experiences, and this time it's about the way in which people feel that their lives have been touched by the divine. And so we asked, have there been any standout moments recently in which you feel you have experienced God?
You know, the connection with God became really apparent, right, when we were told you can't go to your places of worship. Right, when you were told that you cannot bow down in your place of worship, in your churches, in your temples, in your mosques, in your synagogues, in your gurdwaras, in your, and not being able to have share that connection, right, that we have, because it is a connection when you go to a place of worship, right, and because you're all connected, you're all doing that same thing, right, you're worshipping the Almighty, right? and not being able to do that in your place of worship, I think it reminded me, right, of that connection that we should and need to maintain, regardless of whether or not it's in a mosque or a temple or a church.
Not long ago, I'm in quite serious illness, so I was in hospital bed. The pain became quite intense, and I was pretty sure I would not be lasting very long. So it was in quite an intense pain, and at that point, I only have one thing in my mind, and I kept repeating, saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. And the next moment I found that I was lifted off through the whole scenario of within the body and the pain and the suffering to a very comfortable dimension, which is like being wrapped up in a very protected velvet. And for that, it felt as if my companion and my parents is with me and totally secured. And that experience lasted, to me, it felt like 5 to 10 minutes. By the time I came back to my consciousness, I was in coma for 2 days. So that was the more significant experience recently.
I was having a real hard time with my mental health, and this is where I felt connection. But more importantly, I also felt that it's like a friend, right? If you know somebody for years and you need something to help yourself, you can't reach out to them after many years and ask for help. You have to consistently be in touch, be a friend, be engaged with them. That's when you get help. So I feel that it's the same with the God. So if you are constantly in touch and engaged, you get help faster. That's what I experienced last year.
So when I reflect on the past year, I have particularly felt my connection with God in my work with people who are suffering. As a counsellor, I am in front of people who are going through some really, really challenging times, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes I am at a loss as to how to offer them help. But at those moments, I really invoke God and say, you have to help me here. And together we are able to stay present to what is. And that's been invaluable in my work.
Very interesting, people having different experiences of the way in which they have felt the support and sustenance of the divine presence. Very moving accounts there. For me, Lloyd, this raises an interesting question of, if we're saying that God intervenes in our personal lives and can come to our help and support in our hour of need, can we extrapolate that to the whole world and say, God will sort things out, God has got our back, and everything is going to be fine?
It depends on how you look at that. I honestly believe that there is a sense in which God is always working God's purpose out through the chances and changes of this mortal life. I don't believe that God causes things to happen so that we can become educated or to punish us or something like that. I don't think that's in God's capability. God is love. God is light. God is truth. God is wonderful. God is not war, hatred, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't expect God to do anything other than offer us the gifts of God's unfathomable ocean of love and peace and justice. It fills us with it. And we are the ones who bear witness to God's love and peace and light in the world. And when people are exhibiting that, I sense God's very presence in it. This has been a very bad year in so many ways. Talk about auspicious. This is a time for Shivratri. This is a time for God to come and break into the darkness that we're facing right now. And yet I have been, as we just saw in the video, I have been struck with joy and peace in my own heart, watching love and compassion emerge in the midst of all of this. And it gives you hope. It gives me hope. And I see God God involved in this. This is not just us human beings doing our thing. I think this is a way, perhaps inexplicably so, but it's God is working through this. Now we have to have the eyes and the heart to see that and to experience it, to know that to be the case, so that we're not simply assuming that it's on us, that we are the ones, we're the big people who are doing the good work and all that sort of thing. So anyway, I hope I'm answering your question, but I think that's...
You are. You absolutely are. And I'd also like to ask Sister Jayanti the same question. Is this asking or feeling into a support from God something that you do in your life? And I wonder, if so, how directly you feel there is support from that. But also what you say to the question that, you know, we look around us in the world and see the world in the state that it's in. To what extent is that our responsibility? And to what extent can we say, God, you've got to sort this out?
There's been an expression that Lloyd has used a couple of times this afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. And that expression was, we've been created in God's image. And I believe that absolutely, that just as God is love and truth and purity and peace, the original condition of the human spirit, the soul, is also that. But we seem to have moved a long way away from that. And so we find ourselves without those qualities, without that connection with the divine. And so it seems that we've created the situation that we find ourselves in today. At the time that we were created, when humanity was created, with those qualities of God, there was a beautiful world. And we've now moved from that world that was light into a world of darkness. But now I think it's time to return to that world of light. And, you know, it's like when a child sees the darkness, the child doesn't know that automatically the day is going to come. And so the child feels terrified. All sorts of ghosts and boogies and all sorts of things are around. And then when the mother explains, the father explains and gives comfort, then the child calms down. And of course, then you're able to see the dawn, you're able to see the new day. And I feel that this is that very critical time at this moment. I have to say there never has been a time like this before in human history, both in terms of all the disasters and calamities, human created actually, that are coming onto us. But within all of that, then you saw those beautiful experiences and heard people talk about God reaching out to them, God helping them, giving them those amazing experiences. So God is definitely at work. And I think it's a very personal, individual experience for each one. But I think that there's also a scheme, a plan. And the plan that I see, because God is benevolent, always, always kind, always wanting nothing but the best for his creation, her creation. And so I see that we're moving into an era of light again. I see signs of this in so many different ways. A holistic approach that started some years ago, to education, to architecture, to health, to lifestyle. And we're even more aware of these things now. So many people have switched their diet to a diet that is plant-based. So many people are aware of not harming nature, but trying to preserve nature, support nature, and give nature the help that it needs at this moment after so many thousands of years of exploitation. So I see that there is a beautiful world ahead, and the night of Shiva, Shivratri, that there comes a moment when God directly intervenes in human affairs. And I'd like to think that this is that moment, because I see the light shining now. I see the dawn has broken. And so what's ahead of us is the day.
And so what is our responsibility, therefore, to this intervention? We're not just leaving it up to God. It's humanity that has to rise to the challenge. And so how does our connection with the divine help humanity make the changes that are so necessary? How is that mechanism, that transfer of energy going to work out?
I see that it's a question of change of consciousness and being able to take power from the divine, yoga, union, communion. We've been using these different expressions. So that communion with the divine, yoga, union, is going to bring us the power. And we also have now to open up our hearts and our minds to be able to understand things a little bit differently. And by that I mean move away from this locked identity in which I'm put into a box of color, of race, of religion and gender and age, and to come out of that and come to the awareness of that eternal being that I am, the child of God, the creation of the divine. And so when I do this, then all the qualities that are in the divine return to me. They open up within myself. And when humans change, when I change, the world changes. That's a slogan that we've been using in the Brahma Kumaris for a while, but I see that it's actually now happening in a very powerful and positive way. So yes, the darkness has been a period, not just 1 year, but it's been actually quite a while, when we moved away from God and got locked into materialism and consumerism. And now I think we've been given a very strong shake. You know, this isn't the right way to be going. Humanity isn't moving in the direction that it should. And so, yes, our responsibility to connect, to take all that God offers, and then to work with that in our life. Again, a lovely expression that Lloyd used earlier, that the qualities of God are the things that we have to bring into our actions today. So whether it's activism in the way that's generally recognized, or just activity in a very simple way even, the things that I used to do out of compulsion, well, are they necessary? Can I change them? And the things that I need to do, can I do them with peace? Can I do them with love? And the power of truth and love can transform the world.
Lloyd, it sounds very much, listening to Sister Jayanti, that it's through us becoming, as you've been saying, like God in terms of values and qualities, that it's this that is going to make the shift, not only in our individual lives, but collectively as a whole. Do you have a faith that that God is ultimately knowable, that we can create a connection that is in our life in a way that is tangible and felt?
I think it depends on the activity of agencies and organizations like the Brahma Kumaris, you know, and others, to sort of open up this reality to people, that in a sense, not in a sense, for real, that the primary mission of spiritual bodies such as this ought to be to enable people to come to know and understand who they really are, and their connection to God. Those are the two. That's not always been the case. You know, I mean, you don't always find that when you go to the temple or the church or synagogue or the mosque, or you get other things and you get close to it in a way. It's all there, by the way, in one way or another, but it gets hidden by so many practices and so on. So what I'm suggesting, and what I've been doing myself, is providing more opportunities for practice. I'm talking about spiritual practices, where people come to ask that question about themselves. I have an expression that I use that comes from the scriptures, where Jesus was talking about himself in relationship to the people around him. And he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." And I always say, before this body was, I am. And when this body will no longer be, I am. When you get to that sense of awareness of who you are, and that becomes your what shall I say, the means for the strength that you have. Those eternal qualities become expressed by you. So that's what's important. I think more than anything else today, spiritual practices being taught. I've tried to, when I was a president of a school board, I tried to actually have that happen. It is now, but I tried to have that happen in the middle schools that I was the president of. That little young girls would learn how to meditate. Really, they'd have I would think, a real consciousness shift if they'd had an experience like that. I'm talking too long, but.
Well, no, you're actually, inspiring with everything that you say. And I love this idea of the I am. And I suppose if we translate that into your language, Sister Jayanti, that would be Om, I am. It's the same expression in different forms.
Sure.
And how Lloyd is describing contacting this eternal being that I am. And feeling that and contacting a sense of the eternal being that is God. And through meditation, it's possible to really feel that as a lived experience in our life. Sister Jayanti, it would be lovely to catch that vibe through meditation, the energy of meditation, rather than through just talking. And I wonder if you could just lead us for a few moments and take us into that experience of the eternal part of ourselves and that experience of the eternal being that is the divine. That would just be so special.
Thank you, Lloyd, and thank you, Philippa. It's been a joy to be with you both. And yes, let's have a few moments together. Just going deeper and deeper inside, watching my thoughts. And as I watch my thoughts, they slow down. And I go even deeper within. And I come to that space where only I can enter. That sacred space of peace. I am peace. I am a being of light. As I hold this awareness, I realize that I'm quite separate from this body of mine. I existed before this body, and I will continue to exist after this body returns to dust. And in this awareness of I, the eternal being, I feel the presence of the divine, the supreme, the being of light. The source of love, unlimited love that can reach the entire human family and ignite hope in human hearts. Love that heals the wounds we carry from the past. Love that empowers and uplifts. I keep this connection with the divine. And come back to the awareness of the physical dimension. But now, with love emerged in my heart, so that I too can express this to my human family, each and every one, including all, without any exclusion. Om Shanti. I am peace. Thank you.
A truly beautiful moment of meditation there. And as we reach the end of our time together, I'm left with this beautiful sense of humanity reaching out and exploring and experiencing the divine presence, and the divine presence becoming ever more a part of humanity's life. Sister Jayanti, is it your prediction that as the situation in the world becomes more and more challenging, that we will be more and more having these conversations about how we harness this power and energy of the divine?
I'm sure that's going to happen, because this is how God responds to our call at a time of need, that there's a stimulation in which we're seeking and we explore, and definitely we find whatever it is that's going to bring us comfort and power to be able to make the changes that we need to in our awareness, our attitude, our vision, our activity. So I think you're absolutely right. This will be happening.
In many ways, we've reached a place where perhaps it's going to become impossible to carry on without including this presence of the divine. Lloyd, for someone who's been listening today and perhaps up until this point has felt that really they didn't have room in their lives for God or conversations about spirituality, that there was enough already to sort out, but is perhaps intrigued to take one step in that direction, what advice would you have for how to practically begin to open up to the possibility of this divine presence being a part of our life?
I probably several things, but the first would be to learn how to be silent. Just take time regularly to be silent and to begin to allow so much of what people think define them to simply be let go. But I think also finding a source like a BK Center or a church or a synagogue or so that they can make real contact with the divine, and they might change their minds about the particular institution at some point, but to get some connection, especially if they haven't had any at all. But I think for my own, I would say that just really getting quiet, getting still. There's an expression, be still and know that I am God. And to me, that would be the first thing to do. And just experience that loving light, that pure consciousness. It's wonderful.
And of course, Sister Jayanti, many people turn to God in a moment of real crisis or need. But of course, like with any relationship, you can't just treat it like the emergency services and just dial up when you have a need. It's something you need to invest in, you need to build up over a period of time. And then that strength will be there for you when you need it. How do you knit this desire, this longing for divine presence into a practical everyday life?
I think firstly, to seek knowledge and to move in a direction in which you're able to understand more deeply yourself, and then the practice of some of the things that Lloyd talked about so beautifully, that silence, that stillness, and even beginning with just a few minutes each day. And the more you study, the more you understand, the more you want to experiment with those ideas and just experience the things that you've been told about, because it'll be my own practical experience that will make it real for me. Otherwise, it's theory, it's not part of my life. But once I start exploring and experimenting, then it becomes real for me. And the more I do it, the more I become an expert in this, just as with anything else in life. Practice and a little bit more practice and a bit more practice, and definitely there will be moments in which it feels it's a little tedious, nothing's happening, that's okay. But let me learn to keep my thoughts focused in the right direction, and let me learn to make that connection so that I'm able to go further and further. And so, yes, it takes a little bit of time, but in the initial period, not so much, but my passion grows and I want to give more and more time to this.
Well, I hope that we have sparked an interest and maybe kindled a desire to have more and more of this experience. Thank you for your meditation, Sister Jayanti, which was beautiful. And thanks as well to Sister Ayaku from Hong Kong for her exquisite violin playing, a piece she composed herself called Companion of God. So on that note of the companion of God and our journey, wherever we start from and wherever we end up, it's a journey well worth exploring. I'd like to thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your experience with us this afternoon. Canon Lloyd Casson from Delaware, USA, and Sister Jayanti all the way from Mount Abu in Rajasthan, India. Between the three of us, I think we're almost spanning the world, and I think our conversation has certainly taken us on a journey across many dimensions as well. And it will be a subject that we return to again, I'm sure, in the months and years to come. But there we have to leave it for today. I wish you well for your onward journey, your exploration into this relationship with the divine. Until next time, take good care, keep safe, Om Shanti, and goodbye.